So welcome everybody to Preparing for the Troll Attack. I will be your moderator, Anea Lay. You may also know me as Jessica Eanes if you hang out on the Dream Foundry Discord, because that's the hat I wear while I am there. I have tons of experience with online moderation and community management, and I will be moderating this for our three other fabulous panelists. I'm going to give them each a chance to introduce themselves, beginning with the person who is in the front, according to my WebEx viewing, which is Vanessa.
Oh, that's great. Hi, I'm Vanessa McLaren Ray. I write sci-fi and fantasy, most of it published by Water Dragon Publishing, who is like here all over the con. So just track them down and harangue them in places. Most of my social media management experience is kind of in this kind of venue, in running open mics and small group gatherings, largely since the pandemic started. So I have a lot of fairly recent learning in that arena that I'm happy to share to what extent it's useful.
Eric?
Hi, everybody. I'm Eric Grove. I am a writer with short fiction in places like Escape Pod and Nightmare Magazine. Also a writing teacher. I also do social media posts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram for Willamette Writers, the largest writing organization in Oregon, in the United States, and that is one of the things that I bring as far as context for this. Because I have to be mindful about when we're promoting and tagging and involving people with social media events for Willamette Writers. I also was a comic book journalist right as Comicsgate was taking off, which was an experience that I probably will reference back to, and if we get to war stories, and I also in another life, another professional life, did internet security and virus removal and just generally like network security, but like from like a corporate perspective, but yeah, but in that would occasionally, come into stuff like how do you protect people from taking information out of the network that would dox somebody. So that is my priors, I guess, for this topic.
All right. And last but not least, Alana.
Hello, I'm Alana Thornton Raybury. I'm mostly involved in a lot of gaming communities, so YouTube, Twitch, and Discord. I started modding for a Twitch channel 6 years ago, and since then I have run 3-4 official Discord servers for various people. And yeah, so that's kind of most of my background. My pronouns are they, them, and for accessibility, I have a purple shirt with black tie, long hair, pride shawl in the background. My pronouns are they, them.
All right. I think there's one kind of great question to get us started off with, implied in the various biographies that we've got, and that is, what's the difference between moderation and the troll attack preparation on social media versus for event management or community management?
Well, in event management, it's kind of a matter of trying to keep track of where the bad guys are and who they are. And I kind of have a bad guys list developed over time by, just recognizing who comes in. So I know what pseudonyms they use on Meetup. I know what fake emails they use when they connect on Zoom, and then just let them sit in the waiting room. And then always being prepared when there's somebody coming into your meeting that you don't already know, I have a verified list of attendees. If they're not on my verified list, then my cursor is over the 3 dots in the upper right, ready to kick them to the waiting room. If they won't turn on their camera, during the meet and greet, without a decent explanation, and or if they do anything untoward, they're boom out to the waiting room. So just being, just physically being prepared, like you're in a physical space and you've got security on speed dial. And that's my thing. But that's very different than moderating online. And I've done just a little bit of that, but in pretty safe spaces like this.
I think for me, I am the security team that people call up. So if I can follow on from that, I don't really have that much experience with social media moderation. Mine is very specifically Discord, Twitch, and YouTube. So the very fast-paced stuff of like Twitch front page, I think the most people we had in like an active chat at any one time that I was moderating was about 15,000 people, which is chaotic and terrifying. But as soon as you start, you can't stop. Like, you have to just keep going. This is the only thing you can focus on. But with Discord moderation, I find it much slower, so you kind of have time to like reflect on your choices a little bit more. Whereas, like, as you said, with like your Zoom meetings, you have to kind of be really quick with like very live events, like streams and Zoom meetings.
Yeah, it's very stressful, isn't it?
So stressful. Yeah, I think that's like my biggest tip to creators who have more teams. Well, first of all, please have more teams, and make sure, like, as mod, you have access to mental health care. Whether that's like a bunch of resources you can pull from, or like resources that you might even send out to community members, but have some sort of system in place so that your own mental health is protected while you're doing this absolutely insane stuff.
I think my approach has always been, a lot of preventative steps to avoid having to directly wade in and moderate. I do administer like small writing community Discord environments, but they are so carefully curated, and the moderation is happening before people are even admitted. Um, that's not always obviously possible, right? In a Twitch environment where you do want to be able to have, um, many thousands of people interacting. That's a different kind of environment. But so again, my approach is to prepare not just the systems and like the clarity of what the policies and procedures are. Sometimes sometimes when I step into like a Slack channel or a Discord or a forum, if they don't have a very good list of what's acceptable behavior and what's not acceptable behavior, that tells me that their moderation is maybe lax, and it concerns me because that suggests to me that they're not thinking proactively about protecting the participants. And so that's what I try to do. I try to think proactively on behalf of the participants and in maintaining kind of the security of the space. Again, I'm quite lucky, and it's usually at a smaller scale, so I'm not usually having to like wade in and like deal with thousands of people. That's kind of terrifying. Though I do have to face the hordes of Twitter, which somehow seem like a different kind of horde than the hordes on a Twitch stream. But
Well, it's always
Yeah,
easy to hit block,
yeah,
report, block.
Yeah, my experience is that dealing with bad actors on Twitter is very, very different from somewhere like Discord that's sort of your own space. I don't have a lot of experience with Twitch, and I'm wondering, is that more like Discord in terms of control or more like Twitter?
Say it's kind of somewhere in between. You can block a user, like you can ban a user from like the Twitch channel itself, but they can always have like 20, 30, 70, 100 different email addresses that they can use for ban evasion. Whereas Discord kind of has a bit more of a preventative measure with that. Like for Discord, you can set up methods of like you can't talk in the first like 10 minutes of joining a server unless you have your phone like connected to your account. There's like a two-factor authentication kind of thing, so that helps with raids. And there's like an inbuilt Discord feature where you can report a raid and like cancel any active invites for a while. Twitch is so much more chaotic, so much worse. But in a way, it's kind of brilliant because it's so fast paced. You don't have time to think, "Am I okay? I'm not okay. Oh well, let's keep going. I've got another 5 hours of this stream. So there's that kind of like double-edged sword with that, I guess.
So some of it can be sort of like a chalk painting that gets washed away in the rain, and it may have been offensive, but if it goes past quickly, but something on Discord will stay for a long time, then people will argue, and then things will expand. I mean, I've seen Discord servers kind of break down because people started fighting about something that had nothing to do with the purpose of the server, but they, and then everybody else left because it wasn't a pleasant place to be anymore.
Oh boy, do I have a horror story regarding that.
That's a really interesting thread, the difference between trolls and just people kind of, I don't know that they're trolls, but they're leaving topic, or they're taking the entire environment off topic, or in directions that make it less hospitable for everybody else that's there for a different reason. I'm fascinated by the difference there, because it's easy. I mean, it's easier to identify an overt troll, right? Because they're usually doing something that calls attention to themselves, and depending upon what platform or interaction you have, you deal with them with the tools that you're offered. But there is another component to that, which is that people who like get right up to the edge, or people who don't know where the edge is, that's a very tricky area of moderation. I actually did some support for the Nebulas online when they were online in 2020, and some of the stuff that we were trained on and doing and interacted with had to do with folks coming in and joining the virtual conference, and where to draw the line. Somebody put something in their Zoom handle that's maybe offensive. Maybe somebody's got something in the background of their camera that you're like, maybe we don't want that flag there, which is a different type of moderation.
I think with that though, with one word you kind of summed it up, and that's trained. I think as I now trained more to more than actually like moderate myself. I'm less in the trenches and more that guy in the back shouting commands at people. So having a fully trained mod who is comfortable with like not just knowing the difference, but knowing how to de-escalate a situation, and being like, okay, so we're talking about this, that's great. Hey, look at this shiny thing over here, look at this shiny thing, pay attention to this shiny thing, and moving the conversation to the shiny thing.
Yeah,
and then if they continue, then you can act. So
some of it kind of reminds me of I used to do kind of marshalling, where you're one of the people that is supposed to go along with the crowd and keep an eye out for conflicts in real life. And it's much the same thing. It's like, oh, I see you've got a San Francisco Giants jacket on. They're doing really well this season. Let's talk about that. And to draw them out away from the political argument they were having, because you can tap into somebody's happy fandom. It can pull them out of a negative spiral.
I want to tack onto that a little bit to tie back to something that Eric said about sometimes it's not the trolls who are hard, but the people who are kind of right up to the line. And I think one thing that's very useful from a community management perspective is knowing when to escalate the situation and go ahead and let somebody walk across the line they're clearly jonesing to get across, so that then they become the easy case. And like, that's not something that you want to do as a default by any means, but sometimes it's hard for a community to understand that this person was going to be a problem, and that what you did was stop from having weeks or months or years of them being a low key abrasive element, and being like, we're going to cut to the chase here. We opened the door for them, they walked through, and now we can close it behind them.
Yeah, I've definitely done that a few times, and I'm not ashamed to say that I've done that several times either. I think sometimes it's the only way that you can deal with a user like that. Like, if they're constantly towing the line, it's like, depending on their, I guess, activity in the server and like how popular they are, if you ban them or if you time them out or any sort of like negativity towards them, you could have a riot on your hands. I speak from experience. And when you have to deal with that, sometimes it is just easiest to go, okay, so tell me about your opinions on this topic. Please, I'd love to hear them more. Ban. It's like you just okay, maybe not that exact situation, like don't be that explicit, but yeah.
Right after college, I did some part-time working security for college football and basketball games. And obviously it's a different environment than online moderation, but there were some things that were there was a concept that I was introduced to that I both found very problematic and also a useful barometer for interacting with people. And it was during the security training, the security manager described something that she called the attitude test, which was that, you know, she said that we had a lot of latitude and security when we interacted with folks as to how aggressive we were about, you know, because this was like they were getting into the stadium and we could have them empty out every bag in their pockets in case they had something that might be dangerous, or we could ask them, do you have anything in your pockets? It's problematic because they didn't really give training for bias or anything like that. So, you know, but the concept of the attitude test was that if somebody presented themselves to you and you laid down like a soft boundary, basically by saying like, hey, stop here and talk to me for a moment, and if they were hostile to you, that was an indication that they were going to be a problem, and then therefore you would pivot and be prepared to become more intense. So I think about that in terms of, weirdly enough, I think about that in terms of like a lot of interpersonal relationships, like in life, but also in online relationships. If you tell somebody, hey, actually, that's not okay, and then their response is to argue with you, that's kind of an indication that they're maybe not going to respect boundaries. So I find, again, going back to that like proactive process in a moderation and kind of setting things up is to like proactively set boundaries as a test. You know, a test sounds wrong, but basically proactively set boundaries and say, if you adhere to these boundaries, you will have more trust, and therefore we won't need to be quite so strict with moderation. If you don't adhere to those boundaries, then we may end up escalating, like you were suggesting, like either giving them the opportunity to escalate themselves, or even just saying, it sort of seems like you're trying to escalate this situation. Maybe don't.
I think that something like Discord, the easiest way to set that like boundary is a pronoun role. Like set up a bot, have pronoun roles. Because the moment somebody's gonna be like, ooh, pronoun rules, yeah, insert rant here, you know that they're probably not going to be the best person. Like even if your options are he, she, they, and other, like the absolute minimum, you're going to create that kind of, I mean, one, inclusivity for people. Like you're saying very openly, we're a safe space, we accept different pronouns, but you're also going to be excluding the people you don't necessarily want to be around. I think one of the biggest situations for mods is that you can't create a safe space for everybody. You have to decide who you want to be safe for. Like if you're going to have, you know, a safe space for queer people, and you let in somebody who's like, oh, but insert queer type here, and they're not really in the community. It's like, no, your opinions are not valid here. Like there needs to be that kind of, you need to decide who to be safe for, I guess.
I want to expand a little bit on sort of the concept behind the suggestion for the pronoun roles, which is signaling and building structurally into the space what good behavior is. What are some other things that you've seen in your experience or that you found really effective for doing that kind of signaling to just kind of pre-curate or pre-moderate the behavior that you got?
Well, oddly, one of the things that has worked in our open mic signups is originally we went to Meetup like other people, set up the Meetup, and then the link appears on the page, and then of course everybody shows up. And as soon as we instituted an alternative sign-up process where you had to go off-site give your email, say if you were going to give a reading, engage with me a little bit on email. I made up an email and said, just email me, tell me if you're coming, I'll put you on the list. That screened out about 80% of the annoying people that we had, because as soon as there was an invitation to engage in a positive manner, almost everybody who did not want to engage that way bailed. They went elsewhere. It made it a little bit harder for the people we wanted to bring in. But on the other hand, then we got to know them a little better before we let them in the room. So it's kind of the same sort of a little bit of a soft screen. If you're willing to read a set of instructions and do a pretty easy thing and talk to me a little bit, then you can come. And so it's kind of analogous, I think, to, can you put down your pronouns? Because it's very easy, but a lot of people are like, no. And people who don't want to engage that way, well, go find somebody else to harass, fundamentally, which is in itself kind of sad, but you need to protect your community and then do what we're doing here, hope to try to teach others to do the same.
I think modeling appropriate behavior is a good initial strategy. This is not applicable in all spaces, but I also come at this from a very personally privileged place. I don't use a pseudonym, and I try to be public about my interactions with people. And the reason that I'm doing that, for one of the reasons that I'm doing that is to demonstrate that I'm not interested in dealing with the shield of anonymity. Like I respect the choice to be anonymous. I think that is in fact one of the best choices that you have to kind of maintain personal security. But I am stepping out front in most moderation situations, and I'm letting people know who I am, because I want them to know that I want, and again, like in that same way, in an environment, I want them to know how to contact me. I want them to know how to have conversations with me. I want to make sure that they know that my communication is open. So I am modeling that behavior, that this is how I deal with conflict, which is you can talk to me. And then unfortunately, if people take that opportunity to contact me and then they're toxic, I can deal with them. But I'm also giving them like a lightning rod. So they're coming to me rather than going to other people. But yeah, just sort of demonstrating like there's a lot of danger in practice what I say, not what I do when it comes to like online behavior. So any mods or people that are in a mod-like role have to be mindful of like, am I also the one that's stirring trouble? Am I practicing de-escalation on a regular basis? If this person is really getting under my skin, am I exiting the situation or bringing in somebody else to back me up so that I don't behave in a way that is not consistent with the kind of environment that I'm trying to set up? So applying all of the rules to oneself, I think, is a really important first step in all of that process. It's like a signal. It's like basically saying like, I am doing this, and just clear rules up front, like this, we will not tolerate this. For Willamette writers, we have an inclusion and basically non-discrimination statement that we deliver before every in-person panel during our conference that says this is not acceptable behavior. And we do it every single panel, and there's a panel every hour, for that conference. But we do it because we are preemptively communicating that to the entire community, that's what our values are.
That's awesome. I think following from that, like not only to have like accountability for yourself, making sure there's also somebody who is above the mods who can tell the mods like, hey, this isn't okay. Like I've had one mod who was sexually harassing me. In another community, I had one mansplain my own degree to me. Like there's this kind of double standard sometimes between the rules for the community and the rules for the mods. So making sure that the mods are also following the rules for the community, even if it's just within the mod room. Like, it's not okay to use slurs. It doesn't matter if the community can't see it. It's still not okay. So yeah, I've actually got rid of mods who wouldn't like cooperate in that way, like who would like use ableist slurs, and it's like, you're not just making me uncomfortable because I'm disabled, you're making everybody uncomfortable, so bye bye. Off you go.
Yeah, making sure the mods are not part of your moderation problem is unfortunately a common thing that's kind of necessary. I want to talk a little bit more about the private mod room, because this is something that I think is actually very key to a functioning team. I know Ilana has experience with this. Vanessa and Eric, what kind of experience do you have, if any, with coordinating teams and making sure everybody's on the same page and behaving well?
I've only been a member. You know, for example, a couple of conventions, I've been one of the mods taking the training and then calling for help occasionally. Is this word okay? Because this one's in Ireland and the language is different. But I've been fortunate in that role. I haven't had a lot of trouble. And it may just be the groups I have volunteered to mod for, or just pure blind luck in the particular panels I was assigned to. So pure blind luck is a wonderful asset to have.
It is. It's also something that you can set yourself up to have in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, good training. I mean, you know, both those groups that I volunteered for, spend some time live online with the people who had volunteered. So these are the things we want to do. These are the things we don't want to do. Here's a big packet of information. Have it printed out, put it on your desk. Don't rely on having it on screen, so that you can check things and have us, you know, easily accessible on Discord, so you can call for help if you need somebody boosted. You know, so good training was valuable there.
I've always worked with either partners or run a team or been part of a team. So in most of these cases, there's always been at least one person that I could kind of lean on to sanity check me, or to because that what you're getting at when you're talking about a private mod room, even though I wouldn't necessarily say that I was in like a private mod room specifically in like a Discord server, it was a very specific, like, you know, I'm text messaging somebody and being like, what's going on, and, you know, am I misreading the situation? Or they're able to ask me the same question, and we're able to have like that candid communication that is developed with trust and training. Which, again, to Alana's point, you know, we shouldn't be offensive, you know, or catty or mean about anybody in our private communications, but, you know, we might need to be direct about it and say like, hey, this guy's been a problem before, which is maybe not something I would say as publicly, but I might have to have that conversation with whoever is part of my team. For the Willamette Writers Group, I am the head of the social media team. So my trick is documentation, like write it up, like these are the policies and procedures, regular meetings, and just check-ins, even when they're not as scheduled. Like I have a monthly meeting, but I also I'll just send a note and just say, how's everything going? Because you'll find that if there is a problem, as soon as you ask if there's a problem, it'll come out. You know, you're giving the person, you know, you're reaching out to the person, and then they're able to kind of communicate. Alana also mentioned like making sure that the mods, or in my case, like the people that are on the front lines of my social media team, also have support. You know, I'm not a mental health professional, but if they communicate that they're burned out, or that they're getting overwhelmed with having to deal with social media toxicity, I can at least kind of help them to get them to the right spot. And that starts with just checking in. I had a friend who had this, who had just, who kind of, again, modeled this behavior for me when I was young, that would just sort of every once in a while be like, are you okay? Like, it was just a regular conversation piece. It wasn't abnormal. It was just, you doing all right? You doing okay? And initially you're like, that's weird, because not everybody was doing that. But at a certain point, I realized that became part of a pattern. That became a habit of just saying, "You doing okay?" It was a good mechanism to keep the lines of communication open.
We've got a question from the audience that was on the sort of pseudo list I had of areas I wanted to cover. So we're going to go ahead and dive into that one. What advice do you have based on your experience for individuals for protecting themselves? So anybody on their own Twitter feed or website, things like that, because they don't necessarily have an entire community they can kind of pre-program, and they don't have a team for their personal spaces either.
Well, a few years ago when I actually started publishing, I had to take my Twitter off of a pseudonym and put my name down because I needed to be present in the space. Publishing especially runs a lot on Twitter. The main thing I've done in those kind of environments is kind of sandbox myself. I don't follow back automatically. I don't just follow everybody who's made a cute comment that I thought was interesting, because I'll go to their profile. I'll look them up. I'll see what kinds of things they post, see what kinds of things they repost. And if I don't really want that stuff in my feed, I'll just quietly, I'll accept their follow, but I won't follow them back. And the second thing that I do is not do, and that is if somebody is doing something I don't really want to get involved in, even if it is something I kind of care about, I will just back off and don't engage until I feel I'm on solid ground to participate, because there is so much vitriol, so much toxicity on those, and I don't want to be drawn into that well. And that's me personally. Other people dive in both feet, and more power to them.
I'm kind of the opposite to Vanessa and Eric. I do use a pseudonym. Alana is my pseudonym. Like, you will not find a single trace of who I am. Otherwise, this is who I am. But it is my pseudonym. So, I have a blog, I have my own Discord server, I have my own more team that works for my Discord server. But when it comes to my own personal safety, I admit I am pretty slack on it. I'm much more aware of other people's. And I think that's, again, the double-edged sword of being a mod. You're aware of so many problems. What do you actually deal with? The answer is you kind of just have to pick and choose the areas where you're actually going to focus. So if you're going to have a Discord or a place where your community can be, like YouTube, Twitch, or insert other place here, having a mod team is essential. If it's going to be more social media, look at the tools that already exist for that platform. I'm gonna ignore Twitter for the moment because no.
Who knows? Anything we say today will probably be wrong tomorrow.
Yeah. Man, I love Elon Musk's dog. That's the current CEO. I don't know if that's going to stay that way. Anyway, but Tumblr has this great report and block function. So you can actually report people and say what the problem is, as well as actually blocking them and potentially getting their whole blog removed from the platform, which can be amazing at times. So I would say always look at what social media you're using, their own terms of service, what they offer for mod help, and things like that.
Get really in the weeds on some suggestions. Well, not in the weeds, but very specific. And these are from a very security-minded perspective, and so they may not be quite as pragmatic. And the first suggestion would be decide whether or not you want to go forward with a pseudonym or not. That's a branching point, right? That's if you decide, and part of making the decision about whether or not you want to go with a pseudonym or not. One of the things that you have to decide at that point is you have to be honest with yourself about the privilege that you're bringing to whatever environment you're interacting with. I recognize that I'm not gonna be the target for trolls in the same way as some other people, and therefore that made the decision for me to be public a little easier. If you know that there are bad actors that tend to target people that are not cis white males, in the space that you're going into, it absolutely is a reasonable thing to consider a pseudonym. So consider a pseudonym, potentially do that. Other things, this is actually advice that I got from a published author. Consider starting an LLC and putting some of your business holdings in an LLC rather than under your own name, because people can look up your property records with using your full name. So if you are using your real name, or if your real name can be traced to your pseudonym, consider having an LLC and putting everything under that. Make sure that whenever you're posting on social media or your website or anywhere, you are very conscious about how much information you give about your location. Turn off geotagging on photos if you're sharing on a photo app. Turn off geotagging on any social media app. Don't put anything on social media or your webpage saying where you are while you're still there. Put a little bit of a delay there because people show up. One of the other things that I do is I'm a faculty member for a teacher for an author here in the Portland area, very famous, also has a lot of stalkers. That particular author has had stalkers show up at events, and we have had to deal with them. And we always have to remind this author, please don't post where you're going to be on your public place, because you endanger all of us when you do that. We have to go out and we have to deal with them. So consider an LLC, consider a pseudonym, never post your exact location. Don't name your children or your family members. If you know, online, that's just kind of a good security checklist. And again, I'm coming at this from internet security and literal physical security. Be very careful about all of your personal information. Like, don't maybe indicate the year that you were born. People can use that for identity theft. Be careful with your passwords. People will hack your accounts. Like, absolutely use complicated stuff. So if you have a personal website, be very careful about that. Don't just use password 1234. I mean, this is standard internet security stuff, but when you're a public figure as an author, you're at a greater risk for trolls. The other thing about trolls that I really want to stress is that trolls cause fallout. They don't just target a single person and then walk away. They damage everybody in the community. So I have had experience interacting with other public figures. I mentioned the famous author that I work with, who are maybe not as sensitive to other people's security as I wish that they were. And sometimes that means that other people are endangered. So you have kind of an obligation to be mindful of everybody else. There are examples I've heard of authors that you'll hear, don't feed the trolls. There's a reason. There are multiple reasons not to feed the trolls, but one of them, don't feed the trolls, because then the trolls will target you, and if they can't get to you, they will get people adjacent to you. There's an author that attended a convention very publicly. He had a lot of people knew he was attending that convention because he talked about it. There were other people that talked about being at that convention. Trolls threatened to show up at that convention with weapons. They sent threatening messages to other people that they could identify were going to that convention. So another part of the checklist as an author specifically is, please don't make it worse for your community by feeding the trolls. And please don't make it worse for your community by not being sensitive to your security in a way that damages everybody else. That's like my soapbox mic drop. Sorry.
Also, to add on to that, two-factor authentication.
Yeah.
Always two-factor authentication. I have had, oh, my thing stopped, so I've got lens flare, I apologize. But I've got so many content creators who are like, oh, what's two-factor? And I'm like, okay, so we're going to go on this long rant, or you can have the short answer. Which would you prefer? The short answer is just the link on how to do it.
It's all about preventative work, I think. It's doing as much as you can to prevent to make the environment inhospitable for trolls in every environment. So I see a follow-up question in the chat about like.
Yeah, good question.
So I mentioned like, there was an author that was going to be at a convention, and I said that I was going to be at the convention, and I'm here. I'm posting on Twitter, that I'm here, so people know. Yeah, you have to make choices about your risks. if you're going to, and be aware of where you're going to be. So it's all about like when you're going to be at a bookstore, hope that the bookstore has some sort of a policy and they have staff that's mindful of the possibility of bad actors, right? That's the sort of thing, like if the bookstore that you're doing an event at or the convention that you're doing an event at, they should have policies. There should be clear harassment guidelines. Um, Emerald City Comic Con, which is out of the Seattle area here on my side of the United States, they have they put out, for the longest time they put out posters that said cosplay is not consent, and I don't know what other variations they've done, which is their way of proactively asserting what is an acceptable behavior in that space. And by posting those cosplay is not consent, don't grab people, amongst other things. They are communicating proactively that that space security is a consideration. So part of it is being sensitive as an author to the spaces that you're agreeing to go to, and maybe not going to a bookstore if the bookstore's like, whatever, people can show up, we don't care, you know, we're gonna throw out all sorts of incendiary stuff whenever we want. But yeah, that's a great question, and I'm sure that other people have answers. I should be quiet now.
You're good.
I
I would
think
say,
that
if I may, so that for gaming YouTubers, there's going to, and like streams and whatnot, there's going to be like gaming conventions, and there's going to sometimes be meetups. But sometimes you're just gonna like see a streamer or hear a voice that you recognize just as they're like going about the con and enjoying their own day. I think there's like sometimes you just have to accept that there is a danger, there is a risk, but doing a personal risk assessment over what you are comfortable potentially facing, that's where things are really quite difficult, especially if you're not in a privileged position.
And
I was gonna
it does
say-
help to know what your own personal position is and what kinds of things that you are at risk for. To know where you're privileged and where you're not. For example, in all my gamer spaces, I have pseudonyms. I have multiple pseudonyms there because yeah, it can get a little weird there. I have pseudonyms on Meetup because I have been literally stalked on Meetup from event to event. So, you know, you won't find me on Meetup, but I'm there. So, you know, those things, but on Twitter, I've been fine. So I know where things are fine. And I do tell people when I'm going to be at a reading, but I don't tell them too far in advance. So if they care, if they're on my newsletter, if they're subscribers and I have their email address, then they will find out a little in advance. But apart from that, you know, and you know, and it really does, you have to know where you are, what you're at risk for, because we're not all at risk for the same things and our own anxiety levels. I'm pretty risk adverse. I don't go into toxic situations. I will seek help really quickly if I'm in a situation where I need help, because I step back, disengage. That's my strategy, because that's what I'm comfortable doing with. I'm not going to confront somebody and invite them to escalate.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the way I cope. And if you know how you cope, then it makes it easier to go ahead and do the thing that works for you.
Yep, hard agree, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we have 7 minutes left, and the panelists had wanted to share war stories. So, with 2 minutes each, we'll divvy up the remaining time of the panel. Pick your favorite war story and go.
I have one, if anyone's okay with me going first.
Go first.
So this is not a community that I modded for. There were no moderators. There was transphobia that was like rampant in the community. At one point, there was it was a Discord server, and at one point in the custom status of one person, there was a literal swastika in like the icon. After a week after that, somebody wanted to use the N-word. And I was like one of 3 people who spoke up and said, hey, maybe racism's not okay. And the entire server got shut down because moderators are moral surveillance, actual quote there. So Yes, that is one of the 3 communities that I have had dissolve because of a mod incident, but that's the only one where I was not a moderator. The others, I was a mod.
Yarn. I'll give you a light one. I do these open mics, and we had set up a registration process where you had to give out your email, fill out a little form on Zoom, and give them an email to log into Zoom. And you could tell by the names that signed up, and they have no idea what I'm doing. They give me their emails. I look up those emails. I look up those names. Okay, so what I had found I had signed up were apparently a large group of middle school guys, one of whom was using the teacher's email address for his supposed Zoom account. And the others had much more, I don't know, middle school boy type email addresses involving, body part size. And, of course, the ones that did actually set up a Zoom account with the Gmail got to sit in the waiting room. They did not get to go to the fun meetup with the middle-aged people reading each other's stories and memoir and poetry. I don't know why they wanted to do that. My goodness. But I so wanted to email that teacher that, you know what, the kids didn't actually accomplish anything, so I did not. I did not trouble his poor little mind.
Unfortunately, the worst stories are the ones that cross over from digital space into physical space and become a real issue. And those are not fun war stories. And unfortunately I have been exposed to that directly or indirectly. But those are the really bad ones. I'll just tell like a funny story. Because I think that's better in maintaining our tone. It was an open mic kind of situation, but it was an in-person open mic situation. So this is not technically an online moderation thing, but it's kind of the same philosophy. Person gets up to read, and he's reading his work, and it's incredible. He's the person that was running that open mic, and this is an example of setting up boundaries in advance, did not set a time limit. He just said, go until you're done. So he just decided to go, and he was reading for a very long time before we finally had to stop him. And also didn't really set any content limitations and didn't say like anything or didn't ask anybody to do anything. So this guy starts reading, and he just very quickly, from like the first beginning of his piece, is just shouting, virtually just unending profanity to the extent that I can't actually follow what's happening. And I'm like technically not on duty. Like I'm not on duty. Like I wasn't running this event, and I'm like eyeballing the person that is, and this person's shouting loud enough that you can hear it bouncing off of windows, and it's a combination. And this is like there's a combination of black humor and like really inappropriate that was happening here, because at a certain point, I'm like eyeballing one of my friends, a fellow writer, and we were like, is this guy serious? And we're kind of laughing a little bit, but we're also taking it very seriously. So it's that gallows humor that happens when people are so far over the line and you're trying to get the mods to intervene. In this case, the mod being the person that was running the event. So it's just, yeah, sometimes people just start screaming profanity for 20 minutes, and all you can do is just desperately hope somebody intervenes, or in retrospect, just leave. We should have just left.
All right, with 2 minutes remaining in the panel, I want to give everybody a chance to just remind everybody who they are and where they can find you if you want to be found. And then we'll wrap up.
I'll go first since I think I'm at the top of the screen. I have a reading tomorrow evening. I'll be reading from my most recent book and some other ones, because I give you lots of time to read. So join me for that. You can find all my deets and my link trees in my bio. So just follow me everywhere. I don't care. I'm not scared of you.
Put my information in the chat. Eric Grove, ERIK. my website, ericgrove.com, my Twitter, Eric Grove. I'm Eric Grove literally everywhere. So I again, that's one of the advantages of not having a pseudonym. And then I'm on a panel on toxicity in gaming that's in 10 minutes. So it's kind of an interesting transition.
Hello, I'm Ilana. You can find me on Twitter at @IlanaRose_, Instagram IlanaRoseTW, and Tumblr is ilanarose.tumblr. I will put my links elsewhere, don't worry. You can mostly find me, however, on the Flight to Foundry Discord server, because that's where I live. I'm also doing 3 other panels this weekend. Heckin' Good Poise in SFF. Be that, it's amazing. Mental health and games and history in gaming. We're on time.
Yeah. And Ilana means that they can be found on the Dream Foundry Discord, where the Flights of Foundry convention happens.
I know where I do things.
I am an ALA. You will be able to find me at a reading tomorrow. And you can also find me on the Dream Foundry Discord because I live there. I work there. That is my everything. I'm also, the few social media platforms I'm on, I'm an ALA there as well, and the website, same deal, anala.com. This panel has been happening in Toast, which means that post-panel conversation will be in the Toast channel on the Dream Foundry Discord. And go ahead and meet us there. We'll be hanging out for a little bit, or at least I will be hanging out for a little bit. The other panelists sometimes have some places to go. But if you have any questions, go ahead and we can continue the chat there. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and have a good rest of the weekend.
Stay safe
We'll
out
talk.
there.